Hello, everybody. Good evening. My name is Cynthia Alvarez, and this is the Grand Boulevard Coalition Show. I will be your host today. And for today's discussion, since it is October, it is actually Domestic Violence Prevention Month, along with a couple other awareness months too. But for the sake of today's show, we're going to be focusing on domestic violence prevention, share some information, statistics, and answer some questions, things that people believe, about this genre, things that people might know, things that people might not know. So yeah, but before we get into that topic, I just wanted to talk a little bit about what went on last week. Since I was here, I did advertise a webinar workshop that I hosted and facilitated on Friday, and it was focused on self-esteem and self-care. It went really well. We had some participants join us on Zoom, and we basically did an Empower Flower activity. We discussed impacts on self-esteem and the effects of low self-esteem versus having a high self-esteem. And it was really good conversation. We did record it, so hopefully we can make it available to people who maybe were not able to catch it live. But yeah, we do plan to have another one, hopefully towards the end of this month as well. So maybe by the next show that I'm here, I'll be able to advertise that there as well. But if not, please make sure to follow us on our social medias as well. But yeah, we'll get right into the topic for today, discussing domestic violence impacts on children and families. And so this topic might be a little heavy for people, so just kind of giving a warning to those who might not be comfortable listening to some of the statistics. It is something that is very serious to discuss, so but also very important. So just to kind of spread awareness of these situations and what happens, right? So what is domestic violence? The definition from the United Nations is a pattern of behavior in any relationship that is used to gain or maintain power and control over an intimate partner. This can also be, specifically for today, we are focusing a little bit more on like intimate partner violence. So they are similar terms that mean the same thing, intimate partner violence and domestic violence. But it can also, in other cases, it doesn't have to be necessarily a partner. So that's, other kinds of abuse, things like that. But specifically for this, it is over an intimate partner. And this includes any behaviors that can intimidate, manipulate, or injure someone, right? Injure someone psychologically, emotionally, but also physically, right? So there are different forms of abuse, kind of as I was already explaining. There's physical abuse, there is sexual abuse, and emotional and psychological kind of go into a lot of just verbal accusations, saying things regularly towards a partner to kind of lower their self-esteem can make someone feel like they're not good enough, make people feel insecure about leaving the relationship, making them feel like they can't find anyone better in another relationship, and just kind of tearing down someone's as a person, who they are, making them feel less than human sometimes, just very degrading language that's being used to start impacting someone's psychological and emotional well-being, right? Also, there is such a thing as financial and economic abuse. And when you think about that, financial abuse, let's say the partner that is abusing is also the partner that is in charge of all the money, right? So therefore, they hold all the power in the relationship in terms of what their partner can buy, things that they are just allowed or not allowed to get, because the partner kind of holds that financial status over their heads, or even making it so that their partner that is being abused cannot find a job or hold a job, doing things to manipulate them, make them miss work and therefore lose their job, and kind of making them dependent on the abuser, right? That's something that the abuser can do to gain control. Also, technological abuse, kind of falling a little bit into financial. Let's say they bought their partner a phone, right? and now the abuser feels entitled to their phone all the time, saying that I'm paying for the bill, so your phone is mine, I can take it anytime I want to, constantly checking their phone without permission, and just doing things like that virtually, and technologically, to make them feel less than, make them feel like their items are not theirs and can be taken away at any moment. And maybe even being harassed online, on social media by their partner, or on just through the phone, things like that, right? And another thing is also abuse by immigration status. So if you are with somebody that may not have citizenship here in the United States, for example, it can be something that some people, some abusers may hold over their partner's head, saying they can threaten to get them deported. Maybe if their family are not citizens of the US, they can threaten to get their families deported. And kind of holding that status above their heads, so they are in a constant state of fearing for their safety, for their family's safety, and just walking on eggshells around this person to avoid any kind of confrontation, conflict, and just never being able to stand up for themselves because they're scared of what might happen, right? So we kind of went a little bit over some of these forms of abuse there without kind of getting too into it, but those are some examples. And thinking a little bit more on statistics, according to the National Institute of Health, as many as 1 in 4 women and 1 in 9 men are victims of domestic violence. So domestic violence can happen to anybody. It's not just specifically to one gender, one race, cultural background, ethnicity, age. It can happen to anyone, right? So it's really important to see the signs and just realize that, oh, it's only something that affects women, or only something that affects young women. It happens to all people, right? So that's not to say that there are more populations that are more affected by domestic violence, which we'll kind of get a little bit into in these statistics, and also thinking a little bit about the LGBTQ community, right? Because sometimes a lot of these statistics will say men or women, but thinking a little bit of the LGBTQ community, transgender people, and particularly Black transgender women face a heightened risk of intimate partner violence, victimization that can be fatal, right? So that is one of the potential dangers and consequences of being in a domestic violence relationship. So, they can be abused to the point where they might die. So that is something that is very dangerous to someone's safety, especially if they have children involved in this family, right? So they are at heightened risk for victimization that is fatal due to compounding effects of racism and transphobia, right? Because we know that these things are prevalent and these things happen in the US. Those are things that more likely impact Black transgender women, right? And so according to the CDC, almost half of all women and men in the US have experienced psychological aggression by an intimate partner in their lifetime. So the stats were really close. It was 48.4% women and then 48.8% men. So basically by a decimal point, is half of literally all the people that let's say just look at all the people half of those people have been in a relationship where they've had a partner that's been aggressive psychologically towards them, right? So it's really important to think about that. That's, like I said, psychological abuse is a form of abuse. So it's not to say that one is worse than the other, right? Like I said, some can be fatal in terms of like physical abuse, but psychological abuse is also something that people should take seriously as well, right? So if you start to see the signs in a partner that is starting to seem a little aggressive, may threaten to self-harm if you want to leave, or threaten your safety, just kind of constant words. Even if it's not physical, they can still threaten it, and being threatened by somebody that is supposed to care about you is something that is very scary. But yeah, that is something that has happened and that half of men and women have experienced, right? And thinking more about women aged 18 to 24 and 25 to 34 generally experience the highest rates of intimate partner violence as well, or domestic violence. So that's really important to think about too, right? The specific age ranges in which these people are experiencing it. So it can happen to people as young as 18 and even going further down the line to people age 34. So sometimes it's not about the age, it just happens more often, right, to these age groups. And yeah, so those are a couple of statistics. There are so many, and I could go more in detail about this. But since we're only here for 30 minutes, just kind of glazing over a few of those statistics just to kind of really let it settle in on who experiences it, what age groups are more affected, and demographics that might be more affected. But like I said, this can happen to anybody. And thinking more about impacts on families and children who witness domestic violence or are victims of domestic abuse themselves are at serious risk for long-term physical and mental health problems. So that's something that's really important to think about, right? Children who live in these homes are experiencing this on a daily basis or just on a regular basis. It's something that they start to see, and if it affects them, whether they are victims of the abuser or not, just witnessing the abuse is something that can affect the child psychologically and then kind of turn into mental health issues in the future, as well as even physical well-being issues in the future, right? Because like I've said before many times, is mental health and physical health kind of go hand in hand. If you don't take care of one, the other will be affected too. So that's the same for children, right? Especially children who are still developing their brains, still learning about the world. They are more highly at risk for these issues. And yeah, so thinking more about some short-term effects. If you think about young children, preschool age, about 0 to 3, 0 to 5, thinking about their development, right? If they're seeing these things even from that age, you think that children don't really understand what's going on or see what's going on. Children and young children, very young children, are very aware of the situations of their own safety. There's many studies that you can see online about the way that a baby can track their mother's facial expressions, and that can kind of go back and affect the baby and how the baby reacts to certain things and learns about the world, which is really cool to think about. But in terms of domestic violence situations, it's something that really affects a young child because they see, the facial expressions of the abuser and of the victim being abused. They can see that it's not a safe situation, and a child can begin to regress in their development. So maybe they had already passed the stage of bedwetting, for example, or thumb sucking. They can kind of regress and start doing those things again, and that can really impact their health. It can also impact their self-esteem when they get older, maybe if they're towards the maybe past 5 years old and things like that, their self-esteem will be affected. They'll start to internalize it and start to believe that it is their fault. Maybe sometimes they hear things from the abuser that sound accusatory towards the child, and it's the child's fault for these things, and then that child will begin to believe that that is true, and they can internalize that, and that can impact their mental health, their well-being, and affect them later in life too with low self-esteem issues. And they might also, like, some of the short-term physical effects that can happen, they can just have increased stomach aches, increased headaches. This can just be from things that result from anxiety. just being nervous all the time, nervous maybe to go home if a child is at school and you notice that they might be a little bit nervous, headaches, stomach aches, they might just the thought about going back home to the situation that makes them uncomfortable and makes them feel unsafe can be something that can impact them physically as well. And yeah, so thinking more about that, also they can start to display aggressive tendencies. And this can be something from maybe if even it doesn't even matter what age they are, some of them will start to uh, take on some of the similar behaviors that the abuser might take. And that might just be from the child who doesn't know how to express their feelings. They start to let out these negative emotions or just angry emotions out on other kids at school, biting, kicking, more screaming, more crying at school, and just being aggressive towards other kids or maybe even aggressive towards themselves, right? Or in some cases, when I had wrote or written a paper at school, I wrote a paper on domestic violence impacts on children. Some of the kids will even act a little aggressive towards the parent that is being abused, right? Because they start to see that maybe the dad is being abusive towards mom, and the child will think that that's okay, that that's acceptable, and start to act that way towards their mom as well. Not in every case, and it's not very common, but in some cases, it's very heartbreaking, very sad to hear that. Um, and during my experience in my internship, I actually did encounter a mom who was talking to me about how she recently left a domestic violence situation and she has her son, she has full custody, but the son would start to act aggressive towards her and say that she noticed that happened after she had left that situation, and so she believes that it was kind of her or her son taking those traits or just kind of copying what he was seeing in his home, right? So, just thinking about those things, kids are trying to process what they're seeing, what they're feeling, internalizing it or even externalizing it, right? So, externalizing through fighting, kicking, and those things that I had mentioned. And even long term effects, right? So, there can be long term effects, especially if the child isn't receiving any kind of therapy or any kind of help while they're developing. It can lead into some long term impacts that can be serious, such as, like we mentioned, mental health. And they can start to develop maybe some disorders such as depression, anxiety, and even complex post traumatic stress disorder. So it's in short, it's CPTSD. And so those are some of the things that they can have when they grow up. And other things can be physical health, like I said, which can be things like diabetes, obesity, even heart disease, and other issues too. So if they're not taking care of their mental health, the stress levels, kind of internalizing it and just living in high anxiety, high stress all the time, even though they've already left the situation, let's say, they still deal with that anxiety, the stress. They might not be able to react well to stressful situations, or if they find themselves in a relationship with somebody that is abusive, that can also maintain those high stress levels, which can impact their health and lead to things like diabetes and other heart and health issues, right? So, also just thinking about boys, specifically young boys who are witnessing these traumatic things. They can grow up to 10 times, they are 10 times more likely to abuse their partners as an adult. So it is kind of a vicious cycle sometimes when they're not able to heal themselves in terms of what they experienced growing up. They then tend to repeat those patterns and will start to become the abuser. Sometimes they don't even realize it, but because it's things that they have seen, that they have learned. Maybe if their mother, for example, didn't leave the situation, they believe that that was okay, right? So then they tend to find other partners like that where they will try to find the control because that's how their dad taught them, etc., things like that. And these children, maybe even women as well, young women, young girls, when they grow up, will tend to, and this can apply to all children, right? All children that grow up from these situations might resent the parent who did not leave the relationship, because often parents will not leave because they feel that they need to stay and stay with the father because that's what would be healthy or what would be best for the child, right? Sometimes parents will say, I did it for my child. I wanted to stay for my child because I wanted my child to have a full family, right? But sometimes what you'll hear from kids, or even, as they grow up into teenagers, they will start to express that they want you to leave, that they, not all kids, but some of them will start to say, that we should leave, that this isn't safe, that, this treatment isn't okay. So if they kind of see their parent constantly going through this, and the parent doesn't leave, then the child can kind of hold that resentment towards them as they get older. And actually, I had taken a domestic violence class, and my professor had brought in a domestic violence survivor who talked about her experience and how her two daughters, when they grew up and moved out of the house, stopped talking to their mother for many years afterwards. And I believe one or both of her daughters ended up being in domestic violence relationships in their lives too. So it is kind of a cycle sometimes. It's not something that's guaranteed to happen, but it does happen. And they ended up, reconnecting and talking about it. And so the mother kind of shared her story with us, and it was really powerful, really, really powerful. So just kind of learning the inside of what a survivor of domestic violence has gone through. And domestic violence victims will often want to be called survivors, right? So it's really important to make that distinction. When somebody has left that situation, they are a survivor of domestic violence. They made it out. And yeah, so that's really, important to think about too, as well as just thinking about those things. But yeah, so now thinking a little bit more about why is it so difficult to leave, right? Some people say, especially if you're someone from the outside looking in, people might say, just leave. If it's not safe, why are you still there? And kind of like the things that I had mentioned before, it can be difficult for people to leave a domestic violence situation, especially if they are living with the person. And they are being financially abused. They don't have access to any money. They might believe that they're not going to be able to make it out there if they just leave their home. Where are they going to stay? Thinking that they're going to be homeless and things like that, right? Which is a very real fear to have. And some people who have left a situation like that have ended up homeless because they wanted to leave that situation that was endangering them. But some people might not have the support from friends or family, likely because they have been isolated by the abuser to just not hang out with people that have supported them, and because they were manipulated not to, right? So it's something that they might feel that they don't know where to go, they don't know who to turn to get help, so they feel that they're stuck in this situation. And yeah, there's other things that, like parents or partners who believe, my partner will stop if I try hard enough in the relationship, if I do better in the relationship, they'll stop hurting me and things will get better. Just that constant thought of things will get better kind of sometimes will keep someone in the relationship longer than they need to be. And just kind of realizing that it's not up to them to change their partner, it's up to the abuser to stop the abuse. You cannot make them stop, right? And as much as people want to believe it, you can't do that. You cannot control another person's actions. Their actions are their own. And that's really important to think about too, right? And so what to do when you're preparing to leave is very important. If you look up a safety plan. There's steps on how to create your own safety plan. If you go to domestic violence help websites, they will be able to show you where safe houses are. So just make sure you look at that, look online for some resources on things like that. But yeah, that's kind of all that I got. I know it was kind of a lot of information, but thank you all for sticking with me. If you want more information on this, please look online and do some research on it if you're curious. And thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a good rest of your evening, and I will see you all next time. Bye.